So welcome everybody to our unusual talk today. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Monika Frech and I'm the Managing Director at Human Social Business Corporate. And we work with global companies to support them on their journey towards impact. And I'm here today with my colleague, Paulina Remmel, who you just met and who organized today's event. So thank you very much, Paulina. And somebody already posted to the chat that you can use the chat also to introduce yourselves to each other. We have 1 hour together today to learn from each other and hear, of course, from our 3 inspiring guests, Judy, Johannes, and Laura, who I'm going to introduce in a minute. We have prepared a very exciting conversation with them, but please feel free to also add your questions as they come up when we talk. You can post them to the chat. You can also send them via direct message to Paulina in the chat, who will collect your messages from the chat. Please also check again if your mic is muted, and we are happy if you decide to leave on your camera. So our guests and you, of course, each other, you can see the audience. Our event today is hosted by Unusual Pioneers, which is a joint platform from Human Social Business, Porticus, and the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, a sister organization of the World Economic Forum. Inspired by our ongoing research collaboration to dig deeper into corporate social entrepreneurship, we regularly invite practitioners to share what they've learned on their journey. Our Unusual Pioneers program builds on these findings and provides access and resources for social entrepreneurs to help them scale their solutions. We are honored to partner with many leading sector partners and specialists like Futurists, who I will also introduce shortly. But first, for those of you who tune in for the first time, let's quickly explain our take on corporate social entrepreneurship. What are corporate social entrepreneurs? Well, for us, those are employees who leverage corporate assets to solve a social or environmental problem with a market-based solution. And just like entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs use their vision, their expertise, and their network to build and scale solutions that benefit customers, their employer, and in our case also, or in their case, also society and the planet. Very often, these people are real trailblazers within their communities and within their corporations, charting new territories for themselves and their colleagues as they go along. And with Unusual Pioneers, we've built a platform where these change makers can fine-tune their products and services. They can refine their business and impact models and its measurements. They can deep dive into organizational development and corporate transformation. And perhaps most importantly, it's a trusted community of fellow impact leaders. So over the past month, we brought together employees and executives from 17 different companies worldwide and from diverse industries. Next, we will celebrate our closing event on coming Monday that you can also live stream if you're interested to see what has happened over the past 6 months with the Unusual Pioneers platform. Paulina, can you go a couple of slides further? That's our support network, social entrepreneurship. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our guests for today. One of our Unusual Pioneers is Judy Gishoki. Judy believes in the potential of Kenyans to solve their own problems and has personally activated that potential in many, many ways. As a senior manager for corporate strategy, Judy is leading the charge to transform Safaricom from the renowned Kenyan telecom firm into a purpose-led technology company. She's implementing a cloud-based platform to connect informal businesses and SMEs to payment services to make payment services more accessible to all. She conducts research and conceptualizes how businesses may adapt to change strategically, create growth and new value for customers. She's also a member of the advisory board of Young Scientists Kenya, an organization that encourages students to demonstrate their innovations. She's co-founder of the Discovery Center, where she's nurturing children's problem-solving ability by exposing them to coding and simplifying the communication of science. So as you can see, Judy really is an unusual pioneer. Thank you very much for being with us today, Judy. We also have with us today Johannes Stock. He's the Chief Product Officer at Futurists. And Futurist is a digital innovation agency that empowers their clients to create their best futures. Futurist co-creates digital products and services and supports organizations to rethink the way they work. They combine strategy, design, and engineering. With Finnish roots, they now have offices around the world and over 650 employees. As Chief Product Officer, Johannes focuses on helping individuals, teams, and companies to thrive within today's complexity. He brings in profound experience from his work with DAX companies like BMW, Deutsche Telekom, Merck, Volkswagen, Allianz, and Daimler, and I could probably go on for a while with that. Johannes has a deep passion for human development, an appreciation of diversity, and a humanistic compass. He is actually a philosopher by training. On his journey, he worked as a strategic designer, team lead, transformation consultant, and coach in digital agencies and innovation consultancies. His greatest passion is to lead and support others on the way towards future relevance. And we're going to hear more about that today. Johannes, we're delighted to have you here today with us.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And then we also have Laura Edawajo, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I practiced before, so sorry if it's not totally correct. Laura is a lead user experience designer and digital ecosystems advocate at Futurist. Laura is really passionate about working directly with users to create meaningful experiences for them. She believes that the best digital products come from well-planned and well-executed user research, and we're going to hear what that means in a minute. As an interactive media designer and marketing professional, she has a passion for mixing her knowledge of these two areas into the creation of better user experiences. She also co-founded an user experience company in her home country, Colombia. So let's now dive into the topic, which is about problems worth solving. Problems worth solving for customers and for businesses with a customer centricity focus. Judy, can you maybe start by telling us a bit about your projects? Which problem did you solve? Did you help solving, and how did you discover it? How did you know that's a problem worth solving, and how did you go about doing exactly that?
Thank you first, but to think about the problem, we began by looking at the macro level of what the problem is. So as you may have mentioned, I don't know if you missed it, I'm in Nairobi, in Kenya. And what we need to do was first understand where our people are. So the problem is around small businesses, and we realized the contribution to the GDP of the country. And then we looked at the big problems that they're facing. Now, with that in mind, we checked what's happening within what is emerging in terms of technology, because Safaricom is a technology company, and we believe that we can use technology to solve the problems of our people. But we had to understand what that problem is and see what the SMEs are trying to do. So we married the macro level of the data that we have, but then also did analysis to understand our own customers to see what will be the immediate thing that we need to solve. So the problem, as I've said, is around SMEs, and the solution is to digitize their businesses so they are more productive and able to achieve from the effort that they put in.
Thank you very much. And as you just said, how did you, or finding the problems or the problems we're solving in the field coming from a macro level? Now, today we also hear about, to talk about customer centricity. And maybe Johannes and Laura, can you elaborate a bit on your perspective? How do you even go about that? Do you go out and ask your customers? We just heard from Judy that they analyze their customers' need. What does that mean? Can you tell us a bit about tools, methods, perspective on that? We cannot hear you. Yeah, no.
Yeah, all right, okay. It's always a problem. Who goes first, right? So
Sorry.
I think, no, Monica, I think you already said one of the most important things, which is sometimes in design we say, or in business innovation we say, going out of the building, getting out of the building. So really, reaching out to the people that you want to serve as your customers, and making sure that you can build empathy with the people. That means that you try to understand better what is their context, what is the environment they're living in, because I think I think it was John Le Carré, the writer, who said something like, it's always very dangerous when you look at the world from your desk, right? When you try to understand what's happening. And he was talking about espionage literature when he was writing espionage stories, but I think it very much applies here as well, right? There's a danger of either, if you're a designer or an innovator or a business person, looking at a situation and thinking, okay, I understand it well enough to then prescribe or design or develop a solution for the customers. And we think that this is still a big challenge that we also see in our daily work for helping people to really make that step, to really reach out to their customers and be on the ground. And maybe Laura, you can chip in here and tell a little bit about what are the specifics, what are the things that you can actually do in order to understand better where your customers are.
Definitely. So I think most of the times people or groups already have an idea of the things that they want to innovate on. And then that usually also brings a lot of assumptions about the people that you are trying to create solutions for. And I think that's a good starting point, because that makes the research a bit easier or a bit more focused. But I think at the end, it's very important to actually go out and speak with the people. So in the sense of trying to understand your assumptions, I think you probably have heard of tools as creating personas, or maybe just collecting a list of all the assumptions that you have for your customer or user or human. But then I think at the end, it's about validating all those assumptions on the field. And then you can do that with different methods. So my favorite one, of course, are interviews, where you actually have open conversation with that people, and then you open yourself to feel empathy for their problems. And to be honest, I think maybe 90% of the times you discover that what you thought was the problem, it's something else. And then it's where you actually start creating some solutions, and some solutions for problems worth solving.
And in your practice, how do you actually do that discovery? How do you notice that you found a problem that's worth solving, coming from what you just described, your previous assumptions, going out into the field, meeting future customers? Maybe they are already customers, but how do you find those yet unknown problems that you can then solve with a business solution? Judy, I think you told us a very interesting story about that when we briefly talked yesterday already. You want to share that again?
Yes, because the reason why I like that story is because it puts me grounded. It is one in Kenya, there is a lake that is towards the north, and it's a very dry place. And so we went with the family, and I kept wondering, how do these people survive? It looked very dry with acacia trees, and the only thing I was seeing were many cows and beehives, but it looked pretty dry. And I was thinking, if I'm an NGO, the first thing I would do is bring water for these people, because surely I don't know how they survive without water. But when we got to the resort that we were staying in, and I expressed my concern, like, how do the people here survive? What do they do? And they told me, oh, here we don't worry about water. Water comes from underground, and we're able to grow our crops in some spaces. And then that's when I realized it's not water that they need. But had I just passed by, I thought it was a water problem. And so just like as Laura said, sometimes we assume, we look at what we see, and we think that's what our customers want. Yeah.
I think that's a very strong metaphor, to look beyond what you see initially and dig deeper. And sometimes it's hidden beneath the ground. Laura, and maybe you can elaborate on some of the tools and some of the tips that you have to uncover those hidden needs with the future customers.
Yeah, definitely. So my first tip is don't fall in love with the solution. I think I'm a designer and I'm usually really into my solutions. And then when you go out and you test them, maybe they don't work as you thought they should. So I think it's very important to be open, you know, to don't be, try to be unbiased, even if that's difficult, but it requires some conscious effort to go out and to say, okay, I'm a white canvas and I want to learn from my users or my customers. So I think that would be the first tip. And then I think it's very important to be a good listener. I think it sounds easy, but it's not as easy as it sounds. I think it's very important to be quiet, to give them space, to somehow even empower your customers to tell you the truth, to create that trust so you can actually understand and find very good insights. I think that's also very important. And then, of course, you can do that in two ways. As I mentioned before, maybe interviews and direct conversations with your customers is the best way to go. But then you can also validate that with some data or metrics or maybe some research that you can consume from other sources. And I think it's just a cycle. You always keep learning. I think this is a never-ending task. You can always learn more about your users because they are also changing all the time.
I think in addition to that, what I really love, I mean, there's so many things to love about Judy's story. I think very deep down, it also has a message of humility, right? It very much tells you that you need to be very humble when you're approaching different landscapes, different environments, different situations, and that you'll be aware of that the customers you want to serve are very often not you, right? And there is a gap between your understanding and where they are, and then you need to try to build that empathy. And Laura talked about how to get there. But I also think it's important to understand that we all bring our own baggage in such situations, right? We have our own values, our own mindsets, and because we are human, we try to apply that in order to, for example, to solve a problem that we see, a social issue that we see that we want to support. But there's also this gap between our values and maybe our customers' values, and we need to build empathy for that as well in order to get a little bit less unbiased, like Laura said.
And you, Johannes, you work with a lot of companies to build a culture that supports exactly that, a culture of innovation and a culture of intrapreneurship. How do you educate people within large organizations to sort of see themselves from the outside and to approach customers and future customers with humility? How do you nurture that? Because in my experience, the business world is not always like that. It's a lot about success stories. It's a lot about knowing what you do, presenting what you do. So stories of going into the open, like you, Laura, described, not knowing what you'll find and letting yourself be surprised by going into the field and what you find there. That is, at least in my experiences, in many contexts, unusual and pioneer work. So how do you create cultures within organizations that nurture that?
Yeah, very good question. I think one thing that comes definitely to mind is, and there's a lot of talk about that as well, of course, is this creation of a safe space, right? How can you, in order to have that fertile ground for being receptive to different worldviews and mindsets, you need to build that environment first. And I think it very often starts actually with the leaders themselves, right? Within the organization, you need to make sure that you have the right kind of people in place who can actually nurture that environment, because that is very often it's maybe dominated by other values or conflicting values, and you need to try to smuggle that in maybe a little bit. And I think the smuggling in and the bringing in can happen through good storytelling. I think like what we heard from Judy, I think we need more and more of those stories. And that's also one aspect, for example, that inspired me the most about the Unusual Pioneers platform, when we heard from all those social entrepreneurs about their personal stories and the stories that they heard from somebody else, and that made them passionate and also gave them hope to move forward with their own endeavor. And I think it's super important that we cultivate storytelling around that. And then to be maybe one step more practical here is making sure that you arrange those conversations where you actually can have conversations about, okay, what is the world, how we see it, what are our assumptions about the people that we are serving, and what are the facts telling us. So really using the evidence. And again, this can be data gathered through your research, and bring that in, but not only giving it, handing it over to people to read through eventually, but really making sure that you have somebody who's bringing it to the table very in a live manner.
Judy, you have some experiences on that as well.
Yes, I was actually quite glad when you talked about culture, because if the culture is not end-to-end within an organization, because most often organizations operate in departments. So you'll have maybe the technology department, or the person who is doing the product development is different from the person who is going to deliver it. Now, if the product development people are the ones who are customer-centric, and the people delivering on the ground are not, then the overall customer experience is not going to be what you expect it to be. So the culture piece becomes a very critical one, and being able to even have within the organization policies and procedures that allow you for the customer centricity to be across board for the entire organization. Yeah.
Yeah, what I find very interesting is that Futurist is also, it's a design-based company or agency, but you also have very strong engineering roots, and you also working for a telecommunication company. Obviously, there are strong roots in technology as well, and you already told us about how you use technology and digital tools as a means to another end. And my question would be, well, traditional development projects in the Global South and traditional innovation development are often criticized for similar reasons. They're experts who create solutions, often based on their technical knowledge and often in the comfort of their corporate silos, that are then brought to the beneficiaries or to marketing departments who have immense budgets to market them to customers. And we now have design thinking and similar customer-centric approaches who promise to upend that logic. Can you explain a little bit on how does that work? How does that magic within companies work? Does it work? Johannes, you want to go first?
I can go first, yes. It's still a big challenge, to be very honest. I think it's we are so trained, all of us, I think, with our many of us, with the way how innovation was done in the past, where you have a technology and then you try to apply it in the best way possible and bring it to people. But we've learned things, right? We've improved, I would say, as the community. And nowadays, I think we see more and more situations where you're not only going from the direction of, here is a technology that we want to apply in a meaningful way in a social space, but the other way around as well. To really thinking about, okay, what's happening in the social realm? Where are those cases and lighthouses where already good things are happening? And how can we then use technology to emphasize what is there, to improve the effectiveness, to improve the visibility and accessibility of the good things that are already happening on the ground. But I think it needs a balance. It needs to have a balance of those two things. But again, I think it very much starts with understanding that technology is a super mighty tool, but it's one tool, right, that we can use. And we also need to think about always first, I would say, think about what is the social problem at hand, what is the business problem at hand that we want to solve, or that we want to bring at least a little bit of an improvement.
And Laura, when you use approaches like design thinking and other customer-centric approaches, do you see a difference in applying them for social innovation instead of pure business innovation? And how does all of that, maybe also to you, Judy, how does all of that fit together in corporate social entrepreneurship then?
Okay, let me go back a little bit on the enabling culture, because I think there's something that I would like to bring up, and it's the fact of diversity. I think when you have teams that are enabling diversity or empowering diversity, then you can actually hear from the first hand different experiences from your colleagues, and I think that's something that could change the game. You know, I think that's very important to enable. And then I think from my experience working at Futurize with my colleagues from very different diverse backgrounds and competences, it just makes easier our conversation when it comes to the final user. It makes us all more human somehow. And then in that sense, going to your question about how is the difference from the business to the social, I think at the end they are the same tools. And I think you can somehow implement them in the same way, but sometimes you find different outcomes, like the findings are slightly different. And my perception is that for the social field, you need to empower even more your final customers in order to actually create change. I think the impact in this field might be a bit more complex to understand, because you actually creating an impact in a network. So probably a decision that you are taking for a digital product is impacting something on a social level, while for business it's somehow in that way, but the impact is more direct, it's easier to understand. So that's my impression so far from the difference of applying the same tools for those two fields.
Judy, what's your experiences of bringing together both perspectives as a social entrepreneur?
I think from a tool perspective, as Laura has said, the tools pretty much remain the same. I think what is to manage is more a mindset. I'm not going to call it a mindset, because you see, when it comes from the corporate side, what is driving you is maximizing profit for the shareholder. But now when we talk about social innovation, we're looking at maximizing the value that you deliver to the customer. And so you want to make sure that you're not cutting corners or looking at a problem and seeing a problem worth solving, but not solving it because it's not bringing in as much revenue as you thought it would. So it is mainly coming back to then what are the values and what is the mission of the organization.
That brings me also to a maybe somewhat challenging question. When we talk about social entrepreneurship, or social entrepreneurship for that matter as well, we often talk about stakeholder capitalism, which is a form of business and a form of value creation that takes into account not just shareholders, but many different stakeholders, customers and employees, of course, but also the effects a business has on society, on the planet, and on future generations. So how do you reconcile customer centricity, really the focus, the micro focus on individuals, as we heard of Laura? You really go out and you talk to people in flesh and blood. You're out there in the field, and that systemic macro level view that expands into the vast future even. Because there can be products and services, especially or maybe not especially, but I've seen a number of digital products that are absolutely 100% customer friendly. You know, the user experience is great. They draw you in, people love it, and they're happily spending money on them. At the same time, these products and services can contribute to climate change. They can have effects on communities in a negative way, even on the communities where the people who use them really love those products. So how do you deal with that sort of balance? I think Johannes wants to elaborate on that.
Yeah, and I mean, as always, I'm just having my first thoughts on that, because it's fair to say that we are all just waking up to the fact that the first order consequences of what we're doing, for example, the good positive impact that we want to have for that one specific or that customer group, that one specific user, is just the beginning, right? We need to add all these second, third order consequences as well. And I think we need to talk more about the externalities. So when we're doing something, who is benefiting from it, who is gaining economic power, who is gaining power in general, but who is also on the risk of losing out on what we're doing. And I think we are we are on the very starting point, actually, still of developing the right kind of tools, and even more important, again, to Judy's point, the mindsets to even grasp what that entails. So I think we need to hurry up at the same time. So that is the bigger challenge right here, that we cannot think about economy, just economy or economy first. That I think that's clear now. We need to include all the societal, ecological, and other aspects as well. But that is very, very difficult for us, because we are a lot of the thinking that we are still working with, a lot of the tools that we are still working with come from the 20th or 19th century, where we were not really aware of most of those challenges, at least when we go back earlier in time, right? And but it becomes very imminent right now, and we need to do our very best. Right?
And I know that you have a degree as a philosopher, amongst many other things. Do you have a tip for all of us of how can we change our own thinking? You know, what you just said, we really radically have to refocus how we think, and then of course also how we act. But that is difficult. I mean, change is slow. There's a lot of paths that we are on that it's easy to follow them through and just continue them. So how do we trick ourselves into what we actually want?
Oh yeah, good question. And I can only make some suggestions, or things that maybe that work for me, right? And definitely no prescription whatsoever, of course. I think it can help to look at us individually and then maybe see that it's never just us. It's almost always us being in community, being with family, with friends, that actually gives us a lot of pleasure, a lot of happiness. So we are not as individual and as egoistic and single-minded maybe as some of the advertising, some branding work, some parts of the capitalistic system wants us to think we are, right? We are connected. We are very deeply connected, and not only with human beings, with other beings as well, and with the whole planet. And I think it's super difficult to keep that in mind, but I think at the same time, on a very intuitive level, very deep base level, we all know about that quite well, right? And I think we need to bring that to the surface more in the future.
Well, thank you very much. To me, that's very inspiring as we're still at the start of the year to take that into 2022, view ourselves as holistic beings being in the world. Maybe Laura, on a more hands-on perspective, how do you reconcile within projects the customer centricity perspective and the systemic project perspective? Where do they come together? And how do you actually facilitate conversations around that, like Johannes mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the digital industry is still a very young industry, and we are still learning a lot. I think some time ago, it was all about the technology. Maybe last decade, it was about the users. And then we had like these tools, and we were thinking about personas or user stories and, trying to bring everyone to think about the user, but it wasn't still, it wasn't complete. And I think recently we are also learning that this systematic approach is super important. And we are all very curious about that. I think there is not like a last book of how you should implement systemic thinking, but we are all trying because we realize that it's very important. So in a very pragmatic way, I think it's very important to have these zoom in, zoom out conversations along different processes and projects where you really focus about the specific user and specific needs and how solving those needs could have an impact in the system. And it's very important to enable those conversations and actually have them in a conscious way because you cannot take them for granted. And then I'm very curious about that I'm, for example, creating some tools that can also enable those conversations in a systematic way with our clients in our different projects. So it's in progress, but we know it is important to zoom in and zoom out constantly.
Great. I'm really looking forward to those tools once you're able to share them. Judy, you are, besides being a social entrepreneur, you're a strategy director, strategy manager at Safaricom. So you look into the future of your company from a strategic perspective. How do you bring that together with the customer-centric perspective? Because as we heard before, in the real world, in the real business world, it's not always the case that you go out there and you start, with a blank slate, just discover whatever problems you find from your future customers. Sometimes, and actually probably more often, the direction you start from the other direction, which obviously, of course, also makes a lot of sense to start from the business side and from the business strategy. So can you tell us a little bit about coming from that direction?
So from the strategy side, there are two aspects. There is when you're formulating the strategy to ensure that you put customer in the middle of it. So because we have, like I had kind of mentioned earlier, there's the macro aspects of it. So you take time to understand what the customer is doing, but you also look at the data that we have received previously from our customers. You see all the interactions that we've had with our customers previously, give us some form of data. So we use that to try and understand where previous solutions haven't worked, or where new problems could be emerging. But then also we look at it from the macro level and understand that data. That's one. So when actually setting the strategy. But even more importantly, or maybe as equally important, is during execution. Because we talk about the culture part, but then also there is, if you're not measuring it, then you don't know if you're achieving it. If it's important to work within an ecosystem and you don't know to what extent you're doing that, or to what extent your customers are satisfied, then you don't know if your strategy is working. So the point is to ensure that you have measures that allow you to measure the extent of customer centricity during execution, and putting that within everybody as they do the delivery of that strategy, you're measuring how well they are invested within customer centricity. You're measuring how well they are working within the partners and within an ecosystem. If you see, like for Safaricom, for example, one of the critical things that is within our execution is there must be something around the extent to which you demonstrate how customer obsessed you are. And so we have measures that show that. And then we have measures that show you about how well you're working with partners. But then again, because we are invested in transforming lives, we have metrics that show that you must connect your objectives as a person to the SDGs. So how is your work contributing to any SDG? So then that way, you're able to execute. So first you start with formulating it in the strategy, but then also you're able to execute it and then measure it.
Very nice. I think that's a very businessy way of putting what Johannes just said and with his philosopher hat on. We're always part of a community, and I'm really inspired about how you and how Safaricom put that into the language of business and makes that actually actionable and measurable for employees, and then also, of course, for customers. Because what we see sometimes, and this is again changing, is that we see a lot of pledges out there, of corporate pledges, who really want to go further on their path towards impact, who really want to change, who want to be impactful. But as we heard today, it's not easy. We need to change decades-long, sometimes even century-long ways of working, ways of thinking, ways of doing business. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about what you actually did hands-on in the Unusual Pioneers program, and maybe share with us what really surprised you in working with the entrepreneurs, and from your side, Judy, in working with the partners. Something that really struck you that was unexpected on that journey. I see Johannes and Judy smiling. Judy, you want to start?
smiling because it's been a delightful experience. And when I see like futurists have been quite good partners, among others, what I liked was the one-on-one engagement where people just get involved with your project and help you to understand it, to understand and incorporate best practices in a better way. Now, when we talk about customer experience, in one of the sessions, I forget it was with which organization, there was a clear methodology of actually how to engage with the customer and to understand them. So for me, that was quite meaningful. Yeah.
I agree. I think these individual sessions that we had were a great delight, because it allowed us to jump into a specific context, business and social context of a social entrepreneur. And I was really blown away by the fact that there are different ways of walks of life, how people came into such a situation to be a social entrepreneur internally, but all sharing in some way or the other the same kind of passion for working on those challenges. So that was definitely a big thing there. And then it was interesting to see that working with quite a range of social entrepreneurs, also depending on where they are in their journey, right? Have they just conceptualized their idea? Is there still incubation mode, or is this already deep into execution where they want to scale up the whole thing? No matter where they are in their journey, I felt that it's always super helpful. It has been definitely in those conversations to bring back that customer-centric perspective, because it's a slippery thing, actually, right? It can very easily happen that you were very close to your customers. You did the research, you maybe involved yourself in it, which I highly recommend, that you're not only hiring somebody to do the research, but really being at least partly involved. But then after a while, you're going back to your own default mode of looking at things, maybe through Excel files. You look at the business opportunity, maybe through PowerPoint presentations that you bring to your internal stakeholders as a social entrepreneur. And then you lose the customer-centric perspective actually out of sight. That was interesting, that no matter how passionate you are, I think it's always good to remind yourself about for whom you're actually doing this.
Laura?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Johannes. I think we also had this conversation before, so we were discussing the same points about what we did with the program. We shared with them our LSE canvases, which is like a set of canvases that were created based on our experience with different clients and industries. We went there showing them how to use those tools, and then for me it was a very nice experience to see how these tools could also work for them and how they embrace those tools. And they were very curious about how to use them to actually go outside of the building and talk with their customers. Definitely very interesting how passionate you could be with this kind of initiatives. And I was super inspired by each one of the entrepreneurs that I was in contact with.
I want to open up the discussion and encourage our audience to comment in the chat and put in their questions in the chat, and we already have some. And maybe I want to start with one that's very contemporary. We heard a lot about, you just said it, Laura, going out of the building, interacting with your customer, interacting with people out there. Well, we all know in kind of times we live right now, it's not always easy to just go out and interact with people. So how has COVID and COVID measurements impacted and influenced customer centricity? What has changed in the last 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, just starting here, I think obviously a lot of the things that you normally do in person, preferably maybe in person, has gone remote. So a lot of the conversations now happen via Zoom, where you normally would have, maybe flew in the place and talk with the people. At the same time, I think it's part of this paradoxical situation we are all in, that it's it has also brought some, I think, good changes, or maybe strengthened some good tendencies that were already in the place. So one thing is definitely that more and more organizations, more and more design agencies, innovation agencies, helping companies, or even the companies themselves started to use more of the research capabilities that are already in place, right? The people on the ground that are already, part of that community, for example, that you want to serve, instead of saying, okay, we are bringing in the researchers from somewhere else. Really working with the people, because very often those restrictions don't apply to them because they have to live there anyway, right? And go about their business anyway. So you can. I see that as a trend, right? That you're working with others, and I think collaborating is definitely one of the key points that we need to also get better at. So it's good practice to work with people who are very close to your customers, to your audience.
Yeah, it's interesting how COVID obviously has created barriers, very physical barriers around ourselves, but it also some barriers also came down. It's in some ways easier now to reach out digitally and to directly connect to new people from the comfort of your own home office very often. So Judy, you can probably tell us more about that from the perspective of a telecommunication company.
I think it's actually been interesting being the one who people look up to be the one that enables the communication to happen, and be the one who is bridging that distance, and be the one who is enabling for things to continue. So we've had to be agile for us to respond, which being agile also is part of being able to respond to the customer. So being agile has been one of the critical ways that has come in, so that we are able to expand the network as needed, be able to offer the bundles that customers need when they need them, and be able to enable the tools that need to happen. You see some of the things that happened within that time when we have not been, I'll use the word forced to work from home, is also people expect contactless delivery, for example. They want contactless payments, they want contactless everything. If you look at that, at the base of that, it mostly needs a telco, or at least a tech company, to facilitate. So it takes being agile not only in terms of mindset, but being agile to respond to the needs of the customer. Yeah.
We have a question from the audience building on that, which is if and how the COVID situation affected interacting with communities that do not necessarily have the skills or the technology to communicate at length online. So how do you reach communities and populations that are outside the digital reach? Have you had any experiences with that? Any insights on that?
Yes, that was actually very real for us within Kenya, because even if Safaricom has 95% population coverage, we have problems with access to devices, even with the literacy for using those devices. And so the first place we have to begin with is provide ways of getting access to those devices in a way that is affordable for the communities, and then be able to provide content that those communities will find relevant. Like within Kenya, when the pandemic came into play and we had the lockdowns, of course, education, like everywhere else, was affected. But most of our people were out for a while until they could be able to go around the devices challenge. So one of the things that we had to do is use, I'll call it backward compatibility. So you start using mass use devices where you can have a place, maybe like TVs, as old as it could be, to start with, as you bridge the gap to where you provide devices and to where you provide content.
Very nice. Thank you very much. There's another question from the audience touching on the impact measurement that we talked about before, where you, Judy, explained how you make impact actionable within Safaricom. And Ash Stath asks, how do you ensure that your metrics for impact measurement are relevant to the end user and equitable?
That's a very good question, because it's also very complicated. Because from a corporate perspective, the obvious thing that we do will be measuring how well the customers love us. But when you think about metrics like those, they're very focused on the corporate itself rather than the customer. So the person asking is very right on that one. So what we've done is we will get external parties who will do impact measurements from time to time and let us know whether it is maybe with surveys. I'll use an example. We have a product that is called DigiFarm, whose focus is to help farmers be able to grow their productivity. And so if you look at it for Safaricom, what we look at is, we will look at the NPS, which is the Net Promoter Score for the farmers. We will look at how well we've been able to enable them. But when it comes to the productivity, you have to measure the productivity from the farmer's perspective. So in that case, we've had to use surveys and use people who are more specialized with impact measurements to get the metrics for us, which then means it's not as frequent as we would like it to be. It's perhaps quarterly or every 6 months, because that is when you have realized the impact.
But just adding to that, I very much see that as a global trend. Also, we see that in our work, that companies are more and more asking for and seeing the need for a multi-angle perspective on the impact that they create. So bringing in third parties who can actually objectively, as much as that is possible, measure, for example, the way how your business is sustainable, how much CO2 emissions you're creating, how much damage or good you do to the societies, and equality and other aspects of what you do becomes more and more. I wouldn't say it's the norm yet, unfortunately, but it becomes a trend, and it's strengthening every day. So that's good about that. We need to continue in that direction.
Building on that, one more, maybe the final question from the audience. How can we make sure that tools we create to combine customer centricity and system thinking, and then also the measurement of that, how can we ensure that it's used by the design and the entrepreneurship teams in their daily lives? And what do we need to consider the most to implement that?
Oh, I can go with this one. I think I'm a big fan of having methods or clear ways of working. That being said, I don't believe there is one right way to implement these ways of working for every single team. I think every team, each team needs to decide how often they want to run design thinking tools, how often they want to run system thinking tools. And actually, I think once that you define what is the right way to go, you will probably change it next month, because we are humans and we are evolving constantly. So I definitely think the way to ensure it is to evaluate constantly how you are using those tools and if you are using them often enough. I think that's very important. And what is the most important when implementing them? I think it's, for me, it's very much about the impact and the value that you are creating as a team. I think it's very important to constantly evaluate how you are doing that. And I think that will give you like a good guidance on how to iterate and improve both your ways of working, the tools that you are using, and the solution that you are building.
One way to put it, just to support what Laura was saying, is that the research is only as good as accessible as it is. Right? You need to make it accessible to people. People need to be able, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what their background is, be able to work with those things. And we are still seeing research done that is guilty in a way of saying, okay, this is just expert knowledge, and also packaged like expert knowledge, and then people shy away from actually using it. So making it accessible, meaning making also visual, sorry, difficult word, as visible as possible, so that people can actually say, okay, I understand what you're talking about. I can see what you have here. For example, taking pictures, you're using not only words, but also pictures in order to bring across the story for people to work with it and also feel engaged by working with it, and not a little bit like hindered to work with it.
Thank you very much. We are slowly approaching the end of our 60 minutes together. So thank you very much, Judy, Laura, and Johannes, for spending the time with us today. Thank you to the audience for tuning in today. Thank you for your questions. As a final round of lightning statements, I want to ask our three guests. This has been recorded, as you all know, so you can listen to it again at the end of 2022. And my question to you, and I ask you to be short in one sentence, when you listen to it again at the end of 2022, what kind of sentences or what kind of statements, perspectives do you hope are going to be outdated by then? And what do you hope will still be true, still be valid? So what's the agile part in customer-centric social innovation? Who wants to be the brave one to go first with the closing statement?
Okay, I have some ideas. So I hope that in 1 year, hopefully, or more, it's not going to be a challenge anymore to have everyone onboarded in user centricity. I hope that there's no more this. It's a challenge to be in a silo, and it's a challenge that everyone really is engaged with the user. So I hope that's outdated. And what I hope is still a trend topic is the fact that we need to allow ourselves to be open to feel empathy for the others. And when I say others, I mean, yes, your customers, also your colleagues, and also the context.
So I think that has been sort of an action item for our audience to take home with them and make that statement untrue by the end of 2022 and take that to your organizations and take that to your communities. Johannes, are you ready?
Yeah, good stuff, Laura. In addition to that, yes, and I would really hope that this systemic perspective that we talked about becomes the default perspective, that we really think about what we are doing in a broader and a more holistic perspective. That's my wish for the year. I know it's a lot, but we can still wish for a lot. I think hope is very important. And the other aspect is that we are we'll never forget that it's us who are involved in those situations, that we are very much biased always by our values and by our own perspective mindsets, and we can maybe for a second or so distance ourselves from that and become a little bit more objective, but we will always fall back into that and keeping mindful of that aspect.
Final words to Judy. Thank you very much, Johannes.
Yes, I hope that by the end of 2022, terms like customer centricity and customer focus and customer obsession will not just be buzzwords, but they'll be something that we are truly committed to and for which we provide a supporting culture.
Thank you very much again. If you enjoyed, I'm sorry, we are already over time, so I cannot take your question right now. But I invite you to shoot us an email or to connect with us on different channels. If you enjoyed today's talk, feel free, please listen into our podcast that you can find on all the podcast platforms, where we have really very much many more very exciting conversations with our social entrepreneurs from the Unusual Pioneers program, with our partners from our network. So I really encourage everybody to continue the conversation over there. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great night, depending on where you're listening from. And I see you next time. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much for joining today. Bye-bye.